March 14th, 1952. A cave above the Dead Sea. An archaeologist's hand brushes away centuries of dust and closes around something that shouldn't be there. It's cold, it's heavy, and it isn't parchment. For 5 years, this stretch of the Judean desert had been giving up one secret after another. Bedouin shepherds and archaeologists alike had been pulling ancient Jewish manuscripts out of these hillside caves, manuscripts that would eventually be called the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of them over 2,000 years old. Sacred texts, legal codes, fragments of the Hebrew Bible older than anyone had ever held in their hands. But what came out of Cave 3 that day was different. It wasn't written on animal skin. It wasn't ink on fiber. It was metal, 2 rolled sheets of copper corroded into a solid, brittle mass. Not parchment, not leather. Copper. Why would anyone go to the trouble of hammering words into metal? Documents on copper were meant to survive fire, water, decay, the slow erosion of time itself. Someone had wanted this text to outlast everything around it. The question was, what could possibly be worth that kind of effort? Nobody in that cave could answer it. The scroll couldn't even be opened. This is 3Q15, the 15th manuscript cataloged from Qumran's third cave. Most people just call it the Copper Scroll, and unlike everything else pulled from these caves, it holds no scripture, no hymn, no legal ruling. What it holds, once scholars finally got inside it, is a list, dozens of locations paired with quantities of gold and silver on a scale that still makes historians uneasy. That treasure has never been found. Not one confirmed ounce of it. So was this a map to something real? A record of wealth someone had hidden away for safekeeping? Or is it something else entirely? A document whose true purpose got lost along with the people who made it. I'm your host, and this is Scripture Simplified. To understand how strange this find really was, you have to understand what Qumran had already become by 1952. A shepherd's chance discovery 5 years earlier had triggered a race. Archaeologists and antiquities dealers combing every crevice in these cliffs before looters could get there first. Cave after cave produced the same kind of material, fragile, rolled parchment, the ordinary substance of ancient writing. Cave 3 broke the pattern. The Copper Scroll was 2 separate rolls of hammered copper sheeting, inscribed and rolled the way a normal scroll would be rolled. But copper doesn't age like parchment does. 2,000 years underground had turned it into something closer to rock than metal, oxidized, warped, and fused shut. You couldn't unroll it by hand. You could barely touch it without flakes of ancient text crumbling away in your fingers. Whatever had been written on that surface was now locked inside a mass of corroded metal that nobody alive knew how to open safely. For 3 years, it just sat there. Whatever it said stayed unsaid. But opening the scroll was only the beginning of the problem. By 1955, the decision had been made. The rolls would travel from Jordan to Manchester, England, into the hands of Professor H. Wright Baker at the Manchester College of Technology. His plan was as simple as it was terrifying. If the scroll could not be unrolled, it would have to be cut. Every option was bad. Leave it sealed, and the writing stays lost forever. Cut it, and one wrong pass of the blade could shatter 2,000 years of history into scrap metal. Baker built a specialized saw, thin enough, precise enough, to slice along the natural curve of the rolls instead of straight through them. Then, strip by strip, he began. 23 sections came off that saw. 23 separate pieces of a puzzle nobody had seen assembled. Each strip was cleaned, numbered, and laid flat for study, the letters underneath finally visible after 2,000 years in the dark. What they found was not a prayer, not a prophecy, not a story. It was a list. Once translated, the text described roughly 64 separate locations scattered across ancient Judea: caves, cisterns, dry wells, ruined structures, landmarks that meant something specific to whoever wrote this and mean almost nothing to us now. At each site, the scroll records a quantity, sometimes vessels of gold, sometimes silver ingots, sometimes coins, hidden at a particular depth, beside a particular wall, under a particular stone. Add every figure together, and one number keeps coming up: 4,600 talents of gold and silver. That number needs to be handled carefully. A talent wasn't a fixed, universal unit. Its exact weight varied by time and place, and scholars still argue over which standard applies here. Convert it one way, and you get an enormous fortune. Convert it another way, and the number becomes almost too large to take literally. Either way, the scale is the point. This isn't pocket change buried under a rock. This is wealth on a level that, if real, would represent one of the largest concentrations of precious metal recorded anywhere in the ancient world. That's what makes the scroll so hard to dismiss and so hard to fully believe. The writing style doesn't help settle the question. It's terse, administrative, closer to a shipping manifest than religious literature, using vocabulary and spelling that don't quite match the rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls found nearby. And the directions themselves have aged badly. The third terrace, the fissure at the base of the wall. These meant something once. 2,000 years of erosion, rebuilding, and shifting landscape have erased most of the reference points a reader would have needed to actually find anything, which raises the question nobody can fully answer. If this treasure was real, who had that much wealth to hide in the first place? 3 explanations have dominated the conversation, and it's worth being honest about how much each one can actually prove. The first points to Jerusalem. In the years before Rome destroyed the city in 70 CE, some historians argue officials connected to the Second Temple may have moved part of its wealth out of the city rather than let it fall into Roman hands. It's a theory that fits the timeline neatly. A desperate population, a doomed city, a fortune hidden just ahead of catastrophe. But neatness isn't proof. No document ties the copper scroll to temple officials. No archaeological find has ever confirmed this specific hoard came from Jerusalem at all. The second theory stays closer to home, Qumran itself. The site is widely, though not universally, linked to a Jewish sect known as the Essenes, and some researchers have proposed that this community hid its own resources or safeguarded wealth belonging to others. It's tempting because the scroll was physically found there. But that's exactly the problem. Being found at Qumran doesn't prove it was written at Qumran, and it doesn't prove the community that lived there had anything to do with either the scroll or the treasure it describes. Location isn't ownership. The third theory takes a different approach entirely. What if the copper scroll isn't a literal treasure map at all? What if it's a copy of an older record whose original context has simply vanished, or a piece of scribal tradition, part memory, part legend, cataloging wealth that mattered symbolically as much as materially? Under this theory, there doesn't need to be a hoard buried anywhere for the scroll to make sense. It only needs to represent something someone, once, believed was worth writing down in metal. None of these theories close the case. The temple theory fits the history, but lacks direct evidence. The Qumran theory fits the discovery site, but not the proof of ownership. The literary theory sidesteps the treasure question altogether, and that is where the story gets complicated, because for decades, people have tried to answer it not with more research, but by going out and looking. In the 1960s, scholar John Allegro decided the only way to settle the question was to follow the scroll into the desert itself. Using the translated locations as a guide, he led expeditions through the caves, cisterns, and ruins of the Judean wilderness, chasing directions written by someone who had been dead for nearly 2,000 years. There was real excitement in it, the idea that a 2,000-year-old riddle might finally be solved with a shovel and a translated map. Site after site, Allegro's team dug into the landscape the scroll pointed to. They found nothing. No hoard of gold, no cache of silver vessels, just empty caves, dry cisterns, and the ordinary debris of an ancient landscape that had long since given up its secrets, if it ever had any to give. There are several ways to explain that silence. The treasure, if it existed, may have been removed centuries earlier by people who knew precisely where to look. It may have been seized sometime during the region's turbulent Roman-era conflicts, though that remains speculation, not documented fact. The physical landscape may have shifted enough over 2 millennia that the scroll's landmarks simply don't exist in a recognizable form anymore. Or, the treasure described in such staggering numbers may never have existed in the literal sense at all. Allegro's search ended without an answer. So has every search since. Today, the copper scroll is preserved and on public display at the Jordan Museum in Amman, its 23 corroded strips laid out under glass, studied by historians and linguists who still don't fully agree on what it was ever meant to be. Decades of scholarship, decades of searching, and still, no confirmed treasure matching its inventory has ever been recovered. The copper scroll may be a map to a fortune. It may be an inventory of wealth that vanished long before anyone thought to look for it. Or it may be the surviving trace of a story whose original meaning disappeared with the people who wrote it, leaving behind only their numbers, their locations, and their silence. And that may be exactly what makes it so hard to forget. If this mystery pulled you in the way it pulled us in, hit like, drop your own theory in the comments, and subscribe to Scripture Simplified. Because next time, we're heading back into the Judean desert for another story the ancient world tried to keep buried.